Hello everyone, and welcome to this presentation to provide you with expert tips and strategies for the SAT Writing and Language section. In the next 10 minutes or so, you'll be guided through specifics of what to expect on SAT test day, and you'll also be provided with insider tips to boost your score. My name is Dr. Jennifer Winward, and I'm the founder and CEO of Winward Academy. We are so thrilled to partner with Maya Learning to provide these additional resources and insider tips to millions of our students around the world. Now, these writing and language tips are based on my 20 years of experience coaching and mentoring high schoolers through the SAT and also through the college application process. Now, you might be wondering, are these tips for me? Should I put in this time for the next 10 minutes to watch this video? So let me give you a little bit of an overview. These tips are going to be incredibly helpful if you're taking the SAT even as soon as this weekend. They're also going to be really helpful if you're kind of in the middle of studying now and you're taking the SAT in the next few months. And also, even if you're just starting to think about preparing and you just want an overview of what to expect on the SAT writing and language section. So let's go ahead and begin with an agenda. I'm going to start by giving you an overview of the timing and the length of the SAT Writing and Language section. Then we're going to break down the two types of passages that you'll see. Then we'll go through some diagrams that give you a full breakdown of the types of questions that you'll see and how frequently they're tested. Now, that frequency information is critically important so that you can plan your studying accordingly and focus on those high impact lessons first. Lastly, I'm going to provide my top 3 tips for success based on where I've seen students make the most mistakes in the SAT writing and language section. So let's go ahead and begin with that general overview. So the SAT writing and language section is second after the reading. So after the reading section, you'll have a short break, either 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on if you have extended time or regular time, and then you'll begin the SAT writing and language section. So it's 44 questions. That's 4 passages in 11 with 11 questions each. So that's how the 44 gets derived. And then again, 35 minutes if you have regular time, 53 minutes if you have extended time. So what are the different types of passages? So the first type of passage you could see will just have text. So you'll notice in this little snip that I've provided for you, questions 1 through 11 are based on the passage, and all you see are words, right? No figures, no tables, just text. The second type of passage will have text and then also provide figures and tables. So here's a snip, right, that shows you that we have some words, right, that text, plus a table. So then you would have questions that ask you about the text and also questions that ask you about the table. All right, so now that you understand the 2 passage types, I want to review the details and example questions for the 4 most frequently tested categories in the SAT writing and language. So let's start with usage and mechanics, right? The most frequently tested concept on the SAT writing and language section. So 36% of the questions are just on this one concept. So what are the types of questions you'll see with usage and mechanics? The types of things they'll ask you to do will be to revise a section if there's some sort of specific goal, to move a sentence or a passage or a word, delete, add, those types of questions. Now here's an example, and remember, 15 to 16 questions out of the 44 will be on this topic of usage and mechanics. Now that's pretty powerful, right? So this question here is asking you to choose the sentence that's the best intro to the paragraph. That's a usage and mechanics style question because you have to understand the paragraph and what it's describing before you pick the topic sentence to best capture what's expressed in that paragraph. So usage and mechanics, those questions, again, 15 to 16 questions out of the 44 will be worth 100 to 120 points in your evidence-based reading and writing score. Remember that the way the SAT is scored, you've got your math, which is coming from the calculator and non-calculator, and that's out of 800 points. And then you have evidence-based reading and writing, also out of 800 points, but it's coming from your performance in the reading section and the writing and language section. So that means that 100 to 120 points out of the 800 that you get in evidence-based reading and writing just come from usage and mechanics. Hello, this is so powerful, right? You have to master this concept for you to crush the SAT. All right, what comes next? So next comes punctuation. 18% of the questions in the SAT writing and language will test your knowledge of commas, semicolons, colons, dashes, that type of punctuation. Here's an example question, right? Notice it's asking you to choose between semicolons and colons. Again, you will get these questions right when you know the rules for when to use which one. Out of the 44 questions, 7 to 8 of them will be on punctuation. That means that reviewing those rules, again, for semicolons, colons, periods, dashes, commas, will be worth 60 to 70 points. Right? Very powerful when you really focus your studying on these high impact lessons that get tested very frequently. You can really see a huge jump in your score. All right, what comes next? Next, I want to highlight again, usage and mechanics, punctuation. Over half of the questions on SAT writing and language come just from these two lessons, which together comprise 160 to 190 points. Really, really, really important that you focus on mastering those concepts. Okay, the third most frequently tested lesson is transitions. 10% of the questions will be on transitions. We do see a little bit more transition questions on the SAT than we do on the ACT, just as a little aside. Here's an example question testing you on transitions. Again, you're revising part of a sentence in which you're trying to connect what comes before and what comes after to make sure that you're either continuing in the same direction or a different direction. With transitions comprising about 10% of the questions on writing and language, you usually see about 4 of them. That means transitions questions are worth 30 to 40 points. Next, I want to focus actually on figures and tables. So it might seem odd, right, that in a writing and language section, I'm talking about figures and tables. Now, on the ACT, this skill of interpreting figures, interpreting tables, is isolated and only tested in the science section. But on the SAT, that skill of interpreting figures and tables is peppered throughout the test. It's in the math, it's in the reading, it's also in the writing and language. So I wanted to skip to this one because, again, it's a little bit counterintuitive, right? Why a writing and language section would ever give you figures and tables to interpret, but I want to make sure that you know to expect that. Here's an example, right, where you have some text and then you have a table that goes with that text, and then you are asked a question that makes you connect the text to the table. Now, there's usually only 1 or 2 questions out of the 44 in which you're kind of looking specifically at a table or figure to answer the question. Breaks down to about 10 to 20 points. Again, not the biggest game changer in the world, right? Obviously not tested as much as usage and mechanics and punctuation, but still just good for you to know and to expect. Next, you'll see kind of highlighting here, there are some more commonly tested concepts, right? These are good for writing in general, professional communication in college and in careers, not just for the SAT or the ACT, right? So I also want to make sure that you're focusing on verbs, right? Things like tense consistency, making sure that you're writing with complete sentences, agreement, right? Both the SAT and the ACT love to test agreement. That's subject-verb agreement, pronoun agreement, also adjectives, adverbs, and idioms, right? So if you think about it, when you look at this pie chart, if you're trying to improve your score by hundreds of points really quickly, you need to focus on those high impact lessons that are tested the most, right? Like usage and mechanics, punctuation, transitions, verbs, right? Kind of working your way around clockwise. Now, if you're trying to get a score in the 700s, right, up to an 800, well, then I'm sure that you see that you also need to make sure that you're studying those concepts that aren't tested as frequently. So again, you kind of start with usage and mechanics, and you'll want to work your way around the pie chart clockwise so that you're really checking off those lessons based on how frequently they're tested. Okay, so now that you have a good overall sense of what types of concepts come up, I want to review 3 main tips for the writing and language section with example questions for each. So here we go. Right now, as I'm sure you guessed, the top 3 tips would be from usage and mechanics and punctuation, right? Those lessons occur the most. So our top 3 tips for success are going to capture the types of questions that are seen frequently in those categories. So the first tip I want to give you is from the usage and mechanics lesson, and it's about following a question. So what I mean by that is that you need to do exactly what a question asks. So in question 20, you're asked to best complete the description of a self-reinforcing cycle. That means that your job is to do exactly what the question asks. You need to understand the context of the passage, and you need to choose the answer choice that will best illustrate this idea that the cycle just keeps reinforcing itself. So the cycle will continue and continue and continue, right, because it's reinforcing itself. So when you see these usage and mechanics type questions where they ask you to do something specific, like which one is the most colorful, which one emphasizes that Jennifer is bored, right? You pick the answer choice that's colorful. You pick the answer choice that emphasizes that she's bored. In this case, you pick the answer choice that tells you that the cycle reinforces itself. Okay, and again, I want you to see on this question, this is something just on the SAT, but not on the ACT. Notice the questions aren't lining up, right? Question 20 is kind of written above where it is in the passage. So you can't look straight across. Sometimes you're kind of looking up, down to match the question with where it's referenced in the passage. Okay, what is our next most frequent type of question where we have a tip for you? Well, I'm sure you're not surprised. Also from the usage and mechanics lesson, this type of tip is really around when questions ask you to move, they ask you to delete, they ask you to add a word, a sentence, or a paragraph. So here's an example question, right? Asking you if the writer wants to add this sentence, where should we put it? And what I want to draw your attention to is if you look carefully at the answer choices, notice they're switching between options of before and after a sentence. You have to read these super carefully to make sure that you understand exactly where you're putting the sentence. Then, of course, you read the paragraph and you want to make sure that wherever you're moving that sentence that you're connecting to the ideas that come before and after. Right, in our Winward Academy lessons, we go over tons and tons and tons of examples of these concepts to make sure that they're really, really well reinforced for all of you. All right, our third tip comes from punctuation, knowing comma rules. Both the SAT and the ACT love commas, okay? They love testing commas because they tend to be challenging for students. So my third tip for you is that you have to learn comma rules. And just as an aside, it would be great if you used commas properly in your writing of emails, in your text messages, in your essays, just kind of constantly reinforcing that you're using comma rules correctly. So then when it comes game day, you're in the SAT or you're in the ACT, you know those rules like the back of your hand. Like we want it to be really, really natural for you. So the big thing that I want you to know about commas as a quick tip to take away is that you should never, ever, ever put a comma by itself between 2 complete sentences. So what I mean by that is if you look at question 4, right, and notice again, question 4 is a lot higher than where it's referenced in the passage. So you have to be careful because if you kind of look straight across, you're reading 3 and looking at 4. The SAT does make it a little bit more challenging where they don't line things up for you the way ACT does. So make sure that for question 4, you kind of look down and to the left for where it is in the passage. And what I want you to know for question 4 is that you must eliminate option D. You are never, ever, ever allowed to put a comma by itself between 2 complete sentences. Between 2 complete sentences, you can use a period, you can use a colon, you can use a semicolon. You can use a comma, but only if it's with a coordinating conjunction, right? So you can use comma and, comma but, comma so, comma while. but you cannot have a comma by itself between two complete sentences. Critically important rule to review. Of course, we go over tons and tons of practice questions with punctuation, but definitely make sure you know your comma rules. Okay, so what are our final takeaways, right? We've got our writing and language section with 44 questions. Remember, it comes second after reading with regular time, 35 minutes to answer those 44 questions. You get no break after the writing and language section. Remember, you get a short break before it starts after reading, but after you complete writing and language, you do not get a break. If you have 1.5 extended time, which is the most common accommodation given to students who need extra time, you get 53 minutes to do those 44 questions. Same thing, no break. What comes next is the math section with no calculator. So again, we go reading, you get a short break, then you do writing and language and math no calculator back to back with no break in between. Now, on behalf of Maya Learning and Winward Academy, thank you again for learning with us. Once again, I'm Dr. Jennifer Winward with Winward Academy, and we wish you the best of luck on your upcoming SAT. Please also always feel free to connect with us for more resources, insider tips, and tricks to maximize your success on these exams and to help you prepare for college and beyond. Thank you.